Just to review what this class is about, we're going over the commentary of Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, who wrote a sefer called Mechir Yayin on Megillat Esther, where he describes the book of Esther as a metaphor for the experience of a human being as he goes through life, as he or she goes through life. Now, what I find one of the areas of fascination in this commentary is that not only does Rav Isserlis find metaphorical meaning in the words of the scripture itself, but he also finds metaphorical meaning in the words of Chazal, of the oral law, who comment on the Megillah itself. In other words, what I'm going to be doing over the next few minutes is to present you not only textual metaphor, but also rabbinic metaphor as well. So you'll see what I mean in just a moment. So let's take a look at the first pasuk. Vayihi bimei Achashverosh. It was in the days of Achashverosh. Hu Achashverosh? He's the Achashverosh Hamolech mehodu biad Kush, who rules from Hodu till Kush. Sheva ve'esrim umeya medina. 7 and 20 and 100 city-states. So 127 city-states. So before we get into the actual text, our sages in Tractate Megillah tell us something very important. It's a very famous statement, and that is, any time that a story, a narrative in Scripture begins with the word Vayihi, what does that foreshadow for us? That foreshadows something bad is going to happen. Because Vayihi can be read, the first part of that first syllable could just be read as Vai, Oy Vai, right? And so that is a foreshadowing, and the Gemara goes through and gives a number of examples for this. So we know that in the simple story of the Megillah, this is a foreshadowing for the terrible decrees of Haman. But now if we're going to examine the story of Megillat Esther as a metaphor for a human being's life, then the very beginning of the book is when a person comes into the world. Oivai, a baby's been born. That's also something that is a foreboding, that's a foreshadowing of something not so nice, a story that's going to unfold, that is going to be filled with misery and mishap and so forth. And he quotes the Gemara that says that Chazal tell us that even though there was a debate about this between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, eventually Beis Shammai's opinion became the prevailing opinion, which is Noach lo la'adam shelo nivra yoser mishenivra. That a person, it would be easier or more convenient for a person to never have been born than to have been born. Last year, when we talked about Ishbitz Chasidus, I launched into an explanation of what that really means. But one thing is clear: the human experience is fraught with suffering. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to describe that a human being's life is marked with small points of light, but in general, it's darkness. And you live for those small points of light that come in between the long stretches of darkness in life. So therefore, Vayihi, it's not going to be pleasant, but there may be some redeeming factor as well. So now let's get to the characterization of the Megillah. Who is Achashverosh? Achashverosh is a metaphor for the human being, but a human being is divided into various different components in this story. We need to appreciate that Rav Moshe Isserlis is using Platonic and Aristotelian philosophy as a backdrop for his commentary as well. We have this concept in Greek philosophy of dividing all the things that exist in our physical world between form and matter, between surah and chomer. And if these terms are not familiar, they appear throughout rabbinic literature during the medieval period, as long as the rabbis of the time were subscribing to this model of what the world is made of. Anytime you see something, take a chair. This chair is made out of the form of a chair and the matter of a chair. The form of the chair was first embedded into the mind of the designer of this chair. And when he took the raw materials and formed them into a chair, he took matter and formed them into something substantive, which now has the shape of a chair. So that's really the way we describe all physical reality. And form and matter in Platonic writings are known as male and female, respectively. Because male and female is not just a condition in the animal kingdom. Excuse me? This way? Thank you. We're in the middle of a shir. Thank you. But male and female is a description of a sort of a philosophical idea that there are certain things in life that are active and there are other things in life that are acted upon. So when we talk about male and female concepts in rabbinic writings, we discover that a male characteristic is something that acts upon something else, and a female characteristic is that which is acted upon. In electrical engineering, you have the same idea as well. You have a male plug and you have a female plug. It doesn't mean that the male plug wears brute cologne and the female plug puts on makeup. It means that it's a description of a physical characteristic or some other characteristic of the scenario that you're describing. In the human being, and as with any creature, there is a more spiritual entity which is described as male, and the more female entity which is the acted upon physical component of the being, and that's considered to be female. This is not something that Rav Moshe Isserles wrote because he was misogynistic, because he was anti-women. This has to do with descriptions of male and female in a larger sense. Indeed, there is no such thing in this, using this definition of male and female, as a true male and a true female. Every male can be female in the way that he lives his life, and every female can be male in the way that she lives her life, depending upon what they do and how they interact with the world around them. So when we talk about Achashverosh as being the king, this male king, we're talking about the component of the human being that represents the human soul, the human consciousness, the stirrings of a higher calling and a higher responsibility in life. That's Achashverosh. And because he's descriptive of that, the humanness within the human being, that image of God that exists within the human being, he's called Achashverosh because, as we mentioned last week, the word Achashverosh is a contraction of two words, Ach and Rosh. So that Ach means that he is a sibling. He is meant to conjoin with another component of a system. So Achashverosh is the spiritual component of the human being who's meant to join with his physical counterpart to make the totality of the human being. But Rosh, he's the superior of the physical side of himself, or the more earthy component of his consciousness, and therefore he's known as the Rosh as well. Notice that when Yosef built the family, 2 of his 10 sons were called Echi Varosh. One was called Echi and the other one was called Rosh. And Rashi comments, based on the Medrash, that one was called Echi because Binyamin wanted to remember that he had a brother, and Rosh, he wanted to remember that his brother was his superior, was his elder. So that's very much fits in with this interpretation. Hu Achashverosh Hamolech. This is the Achashverosh. That the human part of this human being, that the spiritual components, the superior component of the human being is able to be molech. And that's the basic premise of all Jewish theology, is that we have the ability to rule. You know, when you say to someone, you rule, you're giving them a compliment, but you're also trying to explain that that person has control over a situation. So when the scripture wants to say that Achashverosh, the human being, has the ability to rule, it means that every single human being has free will. No one can ever say in life, my situation is out of control. No, you're the Melech. You control, you have free will, and that's the basic premise of all of Jewish faith, is that every human being has the ability to choose between good and evil. And that's why there's and now the Ramah brings in an interesting Gemara. The Gemara in Megillah asks, how did Achashverosh rise to power? So we have a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel. One opinion says that this is a compliment, what we're about to say about Achashverosh, and the other one says that this is an insult about Achashverosh. The Gemara says, what is the fact? Shemolach me'atzmo, that he rose to power based not on his pedigree, not based upon nepotism, but he rose to power based upon his own abilities. And how can you judge this both in a complimentary fashion and in an insulting fashion? That on the one hand, that looking through all of Persia, there was no person who was able to rise to the occasion like Achashverosh. That's one opinion, and therefore it's a compliment. But on the other hand, that it's an insult, that he was not worthy of being the monarch, and he got together a nice fund together, he took out a lot of money from his bank account, and shmeicheled someone and bribed someone, and that's how he rose to power. That's what the Gemara says about Achashverosh the man. How did he rise to power? But now, looking through the lens of the Ramah, let's look at it metaphorically. The human being has free will, and that can be both a compliment and an insult, depending upon what I choose to do with my free will. I can either use my free will to reign supreme and make good choices in life, in which case I get the credit and I get the accolades, but I can also use my free will in a destructive fashion, in which case it's liginai, because what am I doing? I'm using the pursuit of money in order to be able to get what I want. So therefore, that's the deeper meaning of this Gemara based on this metaphor. So, in other words, that free will is a double-edged sword. Let's go on. Hamolech mehodu biad Kush. He rules from Hodu until Kush. Hodu and Kush are metaphors, because Hodu represents the glory and the brightness that happens when a baby comes into the world. Hodu, everyone praises, everyone's happy, everyone loves the baby. Kush is at the end of life, because the word Kush represents a Kushi is a person with dark skin. So therefore Kush represents when a person's face grows dark and life starts to become dark and you're approaching the end. So basically what the pasuk is saying is that we have free will from the beginning of our lives until the end of our lives. That life is one long series of experiences involving decisions that we have to make from the beginning until the end. And there's another interesting Gemara in Megillah that talks about the words Hodu and Kush. The Gemara wants to know where were Hodu and Kush situated. Now, you and I could look at a map and say, well, Hodu is India and Kush is Ethiopia or something like that, and say that this represents the Persian Empire. No. The Gemara is not talking about Hodu and Kush as actual places. The Gemara says we have a debate once again between Rav and Shmuel. One says that Hodu was on one end of the world and Kush was on the other end of the world, and this is therefore descriptive of the span of Achashverosh's empire. The other opinion, however, says that Hodu and Kush, Gabe Hadadi Havu Kayami, that Hodu and Kush are right next to each other. And therefore what the Megillah is trying to describe is that just like Achashverosh had full and absolute control over two city-states which were right next to each other, in the same way, he was able to rule over his entire empire. So how do we apply the metaphor of the Ramah to this discussion in the Gemara? When a person comes into the world, they have from Hodu until Kush. They have an entire span of the universe, because life is an entire world of chronology. It's an entire world of experiences, of different chapters, different events, and so forth. So it really spans my entire world, your world being your chronological world from beginning until end. But at the same time, Hodu and Kush are right next to each other, because Yamenu Kitseil Over, because our lives, after all, are just like a fleeting shadow. And so even though it may seem that you have forever to get from Hodu until Kush, really, you can get there by just taking one step out of Hodu and getting into Kush. Before you know it, you're an old person and you're ready to leave this world. Okay, let's go on. Sheva ve'esrim u'me'a medina, that Achashverosh rules over 7 and 20 and 100 city-states. Now we all know the famous Rashi, the famous Medrash, and the famous Gemara that tells us that the 127 city-states that Achashverosh ruled over, what other 127 do we find in Tanakh? Sarah, right? The life of Sarah. Vayu chayei Sarah, me'ah shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim shnei chayei Sarah. Now, if I was to ask you, okay, so first of all, think about what's the connection between the two, and there are many different meforshim who explain the connection between the two. But what is the difference between the two in the way? Take a look at the pasuk for a second and tell me how you would contrast to the way that the Torah describes the years that Sarah lived. When it comes to the life of Sarah, it says, Me'ah shana ve'esrim shana ve'sheva shanim. It's the reverse order. Sarah's life starts with 100, then 20, and 7. In the Megillah, it starts with 7, 20, and 100. We just had a Gemara recently that says that in Tanakh, you don't have one uniform way of presenting numbers. Sometimes the larger number comes first and the smaller number comes afterwards. Sometimes the smaller number comes first and the larger number comes afterwards. But what's interesting is that note that Chazal tell us that the significance of 120 and 7, which is mentioned in reference to the life of Sarah, you all know this, that when she was 100, she was as innocent as a 20-year-old, and when she was 20 years old, she had the innocent beauty of a 7-year-old. Now, that's because the 100 comes first, the 20 comes second, and the 7 comes third. But if you now reverse the order, then it doesn't become a compliment, it becomes an insult. That when it comes to most other people who are flawed and fraught with character flaw, so then when a child is 7, he has the arrogance and the chutzpah of a 20-year-old. And when a person is 20 years old, he has the sense of defeatism and perhaps the sense that he knows everything, just like a 100-year-old. So that's what, again, is being portrayed by the 127. And that's only true when there are 127 medina. The word medina means to try and rule over, to try and get control and a lock over your life. When a person has that attitude that he's trying to take control over life and the encounters that he has, so then it's not a very complimentary look on life. At this point, the Ramah tells us, now he's going to divide the Megillah into 3 different acts. Life is a play of 3 acts, says the Ramah. The first act of life is when you're on the rise, you're immature, you're going through childhood, adolescence, and becoming an adult. That's Act 1. Act 2 is when you're in your prime as an adult and you're succeeding and accomplishing and doing. That's Act 2. Act 3 is the denouement, when you are on your way out and you're in your old age. So the first chapter of Megillat Esther describes Act 1. And I'll try and run through the immature human being that is being described at the beginning of Megillat Esther. Bayamim hahem, we go on to Pasuk Bet. Bayamim hahem, in those days, Kisheves Hamelech Achashverosh al Kisei Malchuso, in those days, at that incipient time of growth, Kisheves Hamelech Achashverosh al Kisei Malchuso, when the human being first begins to be seated on his throne of intelligence, when you're very young, when you're maybe 3 years old and you start to be able to articulate ideas and think for yourself. Asher b'Shushan habira, that is in Shushan. Shushan represents, what does the word Shoshan mean? Shoshan is a rose, when life is sweet and everything is new and exciting. So that's the beginning of the story of when a person comes into this life with no worries in life, everything is exciting and new and is a game. And then Pasuk Gimel, Bishnas Shalosh L'Malcho, in the 3rd year of his reign, when he's 3 years old. We know that Avram Avinu discovers God when he's 3 years old, because that's when a child can begin to think intelligently. And yet, a child is immature. All he wants to do is play. So he likes to party. He wants to play games and make a mishteh, make a party. L'chol sarav va'avadav. For all of the faculties within his body, all of his limbs and all his organs, he wants to shower and he wants to bathe and he wants to play ball and he wants to play games and he wants to be able to have a good time with all of the different structures within his body. Chel parasu madai hapartamim v'sarei hamedinos lefanav. He goes into a little bit more of an esoteric explanation of what all of these different things mean. But the words chel parasu madai is very interesting. Chel comes from the word chulin, to profane. He profanes parasu madai. Paras from the word pras, which is prize. Umadai, which comes from the word midot. He profanes the true prize in life, which is the acquisition of wisdom. He profanes the character development, his midos that he needs to develop in life. He's not concerned about that. So that's chel paras mada. He's not worried about that at this stage in his life. He just wants to have a good time. We now go to pasuk Dalet. Bahar oso es osher kavod malchuso. He takes pride in all of his acquisitions and all of the things that make him into a king and all of his power. Ve'es yakar tiferes gedulaso. Because there are three acquisitions in life. There's wealth, there's honor, and then there's the personal character development and growth. But he's not worried about his character. He's only interested in his wealth. He's interested in the honor that he can develop in life. Yamim rabim shemonimu ma'as yom. And this takes a long time for him to be able to experience this. But the 180 days that he makes a party represents the 180 degrees, which is the span of a person's world from one end of the horizon to the other horizon. Where a person says, look at me, I'm in control, and the world is my oyster, and I can take control of whatever I want. That's the Mishnah that is being represented by the 180 days of whatever his world is at that time when he's growing up. Pasuk Hey, Uvimlos hayamim ha'ela. While thinking, he says, what part of life does man focus his attention on? Bimlos hayamim ha'ela. While thinking that this life in Olam Hazeh is really where it's at, he spends all his life on his physical affairs, not thinking about the future, making a party then for 7 days. The king then makes a special party for all those people who are in Shushan, enjoying life the way he is. Lemi gadol ve'ad katan, from large until small, because when you're young and you just want to have a good time, you don't discern, you don't discriminate the types of people that you want to associate with. Everyone is the same. You know, when you're a young liberal person, a young liberal thinker, there's no such thing as judging other people that you're good and you're bad. Everyone is the same, from gadol until katan. We're all here just to have a good time. Mishteh shivas yamim b'chatzar ginas bisan hamelech. He makes a party for 7 days, which represents the totality of human existence, the number 7. And he does it in the courtyard of the garden of the king. And what is the garden of the king? So the word king over here, as the Ramah points out, that whenever you find the word Hamelech, which is what a number of Meforshim say, whenever you find the word Hamelech in the Megillah without the word Achashverosh accompanying it, it means the King Hashem. So when a person decides he wants to have a fun time, he wants to live it up in the kingdom, it means in the kingdom of Hashem. He wants to make a party in Hashem's world. But he does it in the courtyard of the garden of the king. So there's a cryptic midrash about the words garden and courtyard. Because what is it? The midrash wants to know. Was the party in a courtyard, which represents an empty lot, where you set up tables and you can do whatever you want? Or is it a garden where there are things growing and beautiful trees and produce and things like that? So the Medrash says something very interesting, that this was an area in the back of the king's palace that served both as a courtyard and as a garden, because there was an area of Achashverosh's garden which was lush and which had trees and herbs growing and flowers, and right behind it there was a courtyard. So when you wanted to entertain your guests, you would bring them all into the courtyard, and when you wanted to give them a sense of feeling that they were part of a lush garden, then you would have the courtyard open up to the garden. But when you wanted a more intimate space, and then you could cordon off the garden from the courtyard by putting up a drape, by putting up some kind of curtain to separate the courtyard and the garden. This is the way the Medrash explains where Achashverosh's party was. So the way that the Ramah explains it is that there are two parts of a person's mind. There's the garden, where a person is supposed to cultivate his thoughts and is supposed to gain ideas and come closer to Hashem. But then there's the courtyard, which is the tabula rasa, which is that empty slate where a person sometimes leaves his mind fallow. And if he's smart, he allows there to be no separation between the empty slate of his mind and the acquisition of ideas. So therefore the courtyard and the garden are connected. But there are other times when he puts a drape between the two and basically decides to dumb himself down and shut off the opportunity for the acquisition of knowledge. And that's what this Megillah is describing, is that this is the young person who's not interested in acquiring knowledge and cultivating his garden. He's interested in having a party in the empty recesses of his mind. So then the Megillah describes Chur in Pasuk Vav. Chur, Karpasu, Secheles, all of these different ingredients which refer to physical wealth and indulgence. He goes into a much deeper explanation, but the bottom line is that the immature man sees himself as the master of all that exists around him. The pity is that he doesn't take the time to discern all the various forms of creation all around him to enhance his knowledge of reality. Instead, in Pasuk Zayin, what does he do? V'hashkos bichlei zahav. He indulges in filling up the golden vessels. Now, what does this mean? He indulges in filling up golden vessels. This refers to a young man who pursues the opposite sex, and he goes ahead and starts getting involved with girls, because a girl is known as a golden vessel. She's beautiful on the outside, and she's waiting to be filled up, and that's what a golden vessel is. Right? And therefore, he goes from v'chelim mikelim shonim. He goes from one vessel to the other, trying one acquisition, one conquest of one girlfriend after the other girlfriend. V'yein malchus rav ki yad hamelech. And there's plenty of wine to drink, there's plenty to imbibe, all according to the abilities of the king. When you're young and you want to have a good time, so of course part of that partying experience is to do it with girls. Don't look at me. This is the Moshe Isserles, the great author of the Shulchan Aruch, who's speaking. And then in Pasuk Ches it says, "V'hashesiyach hadas ein ones." Now the drinking, man drinks in this world as he sees fit. Ein ones. What does the word ones mean?
Negligent.
No. Actually, that would be that's something else. That's pshia. Onus is compulsion. Onus is by force. Onus means that no one's forcing you to drink. And once again, the Megillah is trying to describe that no one forced you to live your life this way. We know this because this is the system that the king put into place. This is the way that the king made the decree over his whole household. Don't force anyone to drink. Lasos kirtzon ish v'ish, rather do like the desires of every single man and woman. No one comes into this world with a compulsion to behave in a certain way. So now, up until now, we've been discussing man's vices, that he indulges in things that gratify him as an immature young man. But there are other lowly things that an immature man might indulge in because of his baser side. Up until now, we've been describing even just the immaturity of his intellect. Now let's discuss the immaturity of his baser side. And that baser side of man is represented by not Achashverosh, but by whom would you think? No, not yet. We're not up to Haman. We have Vashti. Because again, we have the male and the female side of the human being. The male side is the dominant side, that is the intellect, the spiritual side, and that is also immature. And then you have the female side, the acted upon side, which is the baser elements of the human personality. Now it also. So the problem is like this. Once you allow your higher consciousness, the more responsible part of your psyche, to act in an immature way and just want to party all the time, then invariably your baser sides begin to gain control. And therefore Vashti looks like she's the tough queen that cannot be controlled and cannot be brought under one's domination. So therefore in Pasuk Tes, Gam Vashti Amalga asasa mishtei nashim, that Vashti is reminiscent of the word shis zona, which is the description for a harlot in the book of Proverbs, describing an abased form of gratification. And where's this Vashti form of indulgence done? In the same palace of Achashverosh, which means that once you allow your active consciousness to get involved in physical pleasures, then obviously the darker side of yourself, the more base and physical side of yourself, begins to gain control and begins to indulge in even further and further corrupt activity. But at some point, a person realizes, you know what, I'm going too far. I got to rein it in. I think now it's time for me to pull back. I think maybe I'm going a little overboard. I'm into women, I'm into drugs, I'm into gambling, I'm into all of these different negative behaviors. And not only good drugs, but now I'm getting into dangerous drugs. I've gone from weed to cocaine. I've gone from nice Jewish girls into really not very, very not nice girls that aren't Jewish anymore. In other words, I've allowed myself to degenerate further and further and further. So I've got to try and pull back and break out of my habits. No, it's too late. You've given into, and now Vashti is going to take control. Like with any addiction, it's very difficult to quit your addiction. So therefore in Pasuk Yud, Bayom HaShevi'i, Kitov Leiv HaMelech Bayoyim. So on the seventh day, when a person is fully indulged in this lifestyle, he says to all of his advisors, and their names at this point of the story are not really that important for the metaphor, although the Ramah finds deep mystical meaning in the names of the different advisors. And he says to them, listen, my conscience is bothering me and I want to get Vashti under control. I want to get the darker side of me under control. So what should I do? And also the seventh day represents Shabbos, the Ramah says, because on Shabbos a person is somehow, the holiness of the Shabbos day allows a person to take a step back and to take stock of his life and say, am I really doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing? So therefore, he says, let's see if we can get Vashti under control. Vashti Amalga lifnei hamelech b'chesed malchus. Let's bring Vashti into the court of the king wearing a crown. Let's channel her, let's channel that baser side of myself and make it more attractive, make it more nice. Because after all, Vashti can be beautiful too. I can take the baser sides of my personality and turn that into something positive. But it doesn't work. Because in Pasuk 12 and Pasuk Yud Bet, Fatima'in Hamalka Vashti, the Queen Vashti refuses to submit to the will of the king. And that's when the king Hashem becomes upset with the human being. I'm disappointed in you, says Hashem. I knew this was going to happen because you thought you can control the beast that is within you. But once you allow the Achashverosh to have a party, then Vashti begins to take over. And when you want to try and rein the Vashti part of you in, it's too late. It's never going to work. And therefore Hashem says you're an addict. You've become addicted to a certain way of life and you don't know how to get it under control. And now we have the Gemara that explains to us why Vashti refused to show. You know that famous Gemara that says, I don't understand. Vashti was just as promiscuous as Achashverosh was. So why wouldn't she agree to dance before the king's men? So the Gemara offers two explanations. One is because she got leprosy. She was afflicted with the leprosy from head to toe. So it was embarrassing for her. And the other one is that she grew a tail. Now I have to tell you, when my children were in first grade, this was the very first, right? Elkie, this is the very first thing that the kids learn. And it's one of the most difficult things to shake from a child's mind when you want to try and teach them the Megillah as a more mature adult. But the Ramah therefore says, instead of rejecting this Gemara, let's understand it metaphorically. What causes a person to get saras, speaking Lashon Hara, having this malice in your heart for another person? So it represents character defect. So the reason why it was impossible to get Vashti under control is because the human being has become so defective in his character at that point that Vashti refuses to be able to be controlled, to be brought under his reign. Or alternatively, she grows a tail which represents that you've become an animal, because only animals have tails. So therefore, your Vashti is uncontrollable because of the animalistic desires that you've completely submitted yourself to. And therefore, we continue with Psukim Yud Gimel and Yud Daled. So the king says, Vayomer HaMelech LaChachamim Yodei HaYitim. The king speaks to his advisors who know how life works. Kichein Devar HaMelech Lifnei Kol Yodei Daspadim, because this is the way of the king, that he consults with his heavenly entourage. The Ramah says that the names of the advisors that the king consults with are names of various different angels. And we know that the Medrash says that God always consults with his heavenly entourage before he makes any decision. And this shows God's humility, that before he's going to make any decision, he consults with his heavenly entourage, and only after the heavenly entourage demonstrates that God's decisions are right and just, will God take action. And who eventually steps up? Mimuchan. Mimuchan is the destructive angel that says before God, if a human being has become completely degenerate and is beyond redemption because he cannot control his Vashti, then that person has to be destroyed. And therefore we end the chapter 1 with the death of Vashti. And that represents the penalty that is waiting a human being if he decides to completely submit and allow himself to go down this very, very dark path in life. And therefore, chapter 1 of Megillat Esther is a cautionary tale to the individual when you're young. Don't allow yourself to have too much fun. Don't allow yourself to indulge too much in partying, because eventually you'll come to a point where you won't be able to control the Vashti that is within you. And therefore, God will put an end to the game, which tragically happens that sometimes people's lives end at the very early parts of their lives just because they were too much in control and they couldn't control their destructive behaviors. And then ultimately, the king says, let the queen's crown be given to someone else. This, the Ramah says, is an allusion to reincarnation, that sometimes if a person is destructive in their lives and they end their lives at an early stage, that neshama is taken and is given another chance to have the crown of life be placed on someone else's body, but with that same neshama to start all over again and to try to get it right this time. That's a brief overview of the first chapter of Megillat Esther using this metaphorical approach. In 2 weeks, I hope to be able to continue the story and learn about who Esther is and how she contributes to the growth of the human being throughout this story. Any questions or comments? Okay.